Welcome to my Bitcoin price update for the month of August. Please remember I'm doing this for fun, speak to a financial advisor. So when we look at the long-term Bitcoin chart, it really does like the price discovery of a new asset class. Of course, nothing ever goes up in a straight line. And so over the years, the price has experienced a number of speculative price bubbles, each characterized with the rushing into Bitcoin of a increased population of people wanting to buy Bitcoin. And this time, and I'm sure it is another speculative bubble, this time it's actually ETFs and public companies buying Bitcoin. The ETFs only started buying at the start of 2024. And here it's quite interesting where you see the amount of Bitcoin being held by the ETFs. And it's interesting to see how the Bitcoin price matches that quite well when superimposed above it. Also, as you can see from my graph here, companies have been buying up a lot of Bitcoin as well. And so this for me explains the fuel for the current spike in the Bitcoin price. It's because of ETFs and public companies buying Bitcoin. It really is remarkable that in the case of all of these bubbles, the all-time high for Bitcoin were separated by exactly 16 quarters, 2 times in a row. And then if that happened again, 3 times in a row. Now, I'd agree with anyone that it's highly unlikely that history will repeat itself 3 times in a row. But I am still using this as a bit of a reference point. It's interesting to compare with the previous cycles as a kind of background tool when trying to predict what's going to go on with the Bitcoin price. What I would say about Bitcoin is I definitely wouldn't be buying any now. That's because if history was to repeat itself, the potential upside might be, say, a 3x or something, whereas the potential downside is massive. And I'm approaching this video as a long-term investor would. By long-term investor, that means the last time you traded any crypto was well over a couple of years ago. I found it very useful to look at the logarithmic price of Bitcoin for a much more based viewpoint of what's going on with the price action. It's interesting that it really was on a certain trajectory until the Bitcoin Cash hard fork. And then since that time point, it followed a new trajectory, which seems to have maintained since 2019. When I zoom in, though, we see that the current run is actually on an even steeper trajectory. So these lines, which only visually make sense in the logarithmic graph, I've transposed onto my normal graph here, onto my linear graph here, and you can see them as this line here and this line here. So these, for me, make for very useful kind of reference points when working with a linear time frame. Within this linear time frame, I've got what I call my chill channel here. Despite the drama of Friday, we're actually still within my chill channel. But then the more serious backstops for me is this blue trend line, which I've transposed over from the logarithmic chart. And then also what I've mentioned in early videos, the 52-week moving average, which is something that has supported Bitcoin since before 2019. So back to the previous price so-called cycles. And so far, this bull market does seem to resemble the 2017 bull market much more than it does the previous bull market. I think that the previous bull market was actually a bit of a weird one, though, because China banned Bitcoin mining right in the middle of it, which I think may explain why it wobbled around like it did. But it's kind of good to see we're definitely still on track with the 2017 kind of situation. If history was to repeat itself for a third time, then all the action won't be until the last few months of the year. I've been using this wonderful website, BitInfo Charts, to track down the age of all the Bitcoin in existence. I've then been plugging it into this Excel spreadsheet. And what we see is that 15% of all Bitcoin are lost or early miners, 8% have been held for 2 cycles, and 18% for 1 cycle. That does leave an awful lot, though, of Bitcoin which is liquid, i.e., it's changed hands since January of 2022. 11% of all the Bitcoin is retail held on exchanges, 2% countries, 4% companies, excluding MicroStrategy, and 3% MicroStrategy. 7% are ETFs. So there is actually quite a lot of unknown liquid BTC. This is kind of a bad thing because it kind of casts lots of doubt on whatever you're trying to model when a third of the ownership of this asset isn't really known. What is for sure, though, is that since beginning of 2024, there wasn't any ETFs owning Bitcoin. So this number from 0 to 7% is obviously a significant change. And so you can visually see here the importance of the ETFs. I've been mapping out this since the beginning of the year, and what I've found was that from February to May this year, 0.3 million Bitcoin moved from hodlers to liquid unknown Bitcoin. And then only this month of July, we've seen some of this Bitcoin move from unknown into either ETFs or private companies. With the ETFs, we can see here how when we've had big impulses of ETFs buying Bitcoin, that did correspond with the price going up. Over the last 3 days, there's actually a 5% drop in the price of Bitcoin. That's about 6,000. So I think a lot of people are kind of get panicky, but that isn't really that big a deal in the context of what typical movements in the price of Bitcoin are. Of course, that happened in exactly the same time as the S&P 500 dropped by about 3% over 2 days. So my feeling is that this downturn's got more to do with what's going on with the S&P general market stroke risk appetite than it has with any fundamental aspects. Here we have the spot Bitcoin ETF assets under management and their on-chain holdings of BTC. So here we can see that the BTC held by the ETFs continue to increase in the month of July. No meaningful change for countries, and the amount held by companies increased, as well as that held by MicroStrategy. So overall, we have a very kind of bullish trend continuing here. The ETFs keep on buying more Bitcoin, and so do the companies. And I've got the raw numbers for that here. We see ETFs increase their holdings by 5% and public companies by 8%. In terms of retail held on exchanges, it continued to drop, but this is actually a bit of a unuseful scale. And in reality, retail on exchanges is kind of flat all year, just dipping a little bit the last couple of months. This would look a lot less dramatic if the graph started at 0 million Bitcoin and not 2 million Bitcoin. MicroStrategy managed to raise 2.5 billion again from equity raise in July. So they keep on raising money to buy Bitcoin. In terms of the countries, the USA actually sold some Bitcoin, as did Finland, who sold most of their Bitcoin. The UK actually gained a very small amount of Bitcoin. Maybe they raided a people smuggling ring or something. And very interesting is the country of Bhutan, who now have over 11,000 Bitcoin. Bhutan is a tiny country with a population of less than 1 million. So it's fascinating to see this happen. In terms of the public companies owning Bitcoin, it's interesting to see this new one, New York Stock Exchange listed Bullish, come right into the charts with over 24,000 Bitcoin. And we see that Metaplanet increased their holdings by 28%. This list, which I get off the website bitbo.io, it keeps on getting longer every month I come here to do my updates. There really are loads and loads of public companies buying Bitcoin. And so this really has to be a bullish signal for Bitcoin, you have to say. It's everything you'd be asking for if you wanted to replicate another one of these. In terms of private companies, well, Tether actually seemed to have sold some Bitcoin, but BitMEX bought a lot, increasing their holdings by 36%. One thing I noticed was that SpaceX are in here. They hold zero point 0.9 billions worth of Bitcoin. Something I forgot to mention in terms of countries is that we have the city of Roswell in New Mexico have started buying Bitcoin. There's an article about it on fxstreet.com. This is the first time that actual US cities have started buying Bitcoin to add to strategic Bitcoin reserves. So, in terms of the long term trend this year, it continues to be kind of bullish. ETFs keep on buying Bitcoin. We've got the example of a US city council buying Bitcoin for their reserves. Public and private companies are both buying Bitcoin increasingly. So I've got my KPI I'm keeping track of. And in terms of the cycle, it's still looking good. The ETFs are still buying Bitcoin and companies are still buying Bitcoin. In terms of the Bitcoin flow into these, they don't yet look at mania levels. MicroStrategy are still able to raise money to buy Bitcoin, and versus the M2 money supply and the S&P 500, the Bitcoin market cap is still at fairly reasonable numbers. And the same in terms of the percentage of US ETFs that are invested in Bitcoin ETFs. Down here, I have my sources for these calculations. Don't trust, verify. So the pattern continues of more money being going into ETFs and into US listed stocks and other stocks from around the world to buy Bitcoin. And there's no sign here that we've lost momentum at all. So I consider us to be still in the chill channel. And I've mentioned this line here, which I transposed from my logarithmic chart and the 52-week moving average as potential levels where we might start to be getting worried about this bull run. But nevertheless, all of the fundamentals appear good. So I hope you found this video useful. Make sure you speak to your qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision. See you at the next video. I do videos like this one just for fun as a hobby. It's for entertainment purposes only. Always consult a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision.